created a project called Project Bob, which is designed to illustrate some of the basic fundamental tools that a lot of applications use. For example, the text field, notifications, date picker, all of those elements. And I think these are things that I've been struggling with in my learning process. And so I've dove into them and tried to really understand them. And I'm going to try and share my understanding with you. So to give you an idea of the total project, what we're going to do today is Bob-1. Bob-1 by itself is really a single view where if you're creating some kind of a group where you want members to be added to it, and then you want to list the members in a table view, and then you want to persist the data of those members in a database, then this is basically these three sessions. So Bob-1, we're focusing on the screen, which captures the data. And I'll show you that in a minute. Bob-2, which is a future presentation, is where I bring in the table view, and I have customized cells, and the information that we created in Bob-1 for an individual is now going to be brought into the table view. And we'll show you how things go back and forth between the table view, how you can select something to edit. Basically, you navigate how you delete things in a table view, all the things you might want to do in a table view. And then Bob-3 is where we persist the data. So by the time you're done with the cycle of these three things, you'll have essentially a completed application. And this is all on GitHub. It's open to the public. You can download it. You can just use that as essentially resources if you build your own applications. What Bob-1 really consists of is this screen. It looks very simple, but like a lot of things from Apple, they look simple. There's a lot of complexity here. And so we're going to unpack that complexity, and I'm going to actually go down some blind alleys with you, and you'll see what the problem is and what it is. For example, just to give you an indication of the complexity, we've got here a picture of the member that we want to identify. We have his name, the city where he lives, his email address, the member status. Okay, so if we were making an application for this group, you might be a guest, you might be a member, you might be a presenter, you might be an organizer, as an example of different status you might have. And you might also keep track of join date. Now, obviously for name, you would type that in. But if instead of city it was a phone number, you'd want a kind of keyboard that looks like a phone. And if it's email, you want a more customized keyboard that has an ampersand in it. And if you have member status, you don't really want to type that in, because if every member types something different, you're not going to have a coherent database. So what you really want to do is create an array and then populate a picker with that array, and then just let the users scroll through that and click on it, and then have that populate that text field. Okay? Member status is a picker view, and then the last one is a date picker. You've seen those where you make a schedule. So we'll create a date picker for that one, and I'll show you how these things work to trigger the keyboard. For those of you who have downloaded a copy of the code from the GitHub site, let me just add that this presentation starts off with the initial screen layout in place. To create this screen, you would need to add 5 text fields and 1 image view to the screen, and you would use stack views and constraints to lock the view down. If this is new to you, I suggest you take a look at the Project Mongoose presentation, which goes into some detail on this material. But here it is our starting point. Let's get started. This is the only code that's in here. And in fact, you can see there's a lot of code here. And if we make good progress, at the end of this, all of this code will be live. You'll notice that next to each code section, there's a reference to a slide. Okay? And in fact, the way this works is if I want to uncomment this, I just simply add a dash here and it uncomments that code. I also would have to come over here and uncomment that. You can see how easy it is to essentially bring the code back alive. And there's a reference to the specific slide, and there's a copy of the slide deck on the GitHub. So you've got everything. If you download it from the GitHub, it's all there. If you run the code right now, you get this one UI view. And one of the things that you need to know about, and these are all text fields. They're just plain vanilla text fields. But what I've done for you, because I've put all of these 5 text fields in a stack view, and I've put this image view in another stack view, and I actually discuss that in a separate presentation, how you handle constraints and so on. So the code we're running right now is just this thing, and if you click on it, when you click on a text field, one of the things that happens is it becomes the first responder. How does it know to do that? It's a state of the text field. In other words, it knows it's an event that's raised. It knows that you're now going to be doing things in that text field. Okay, and when it becomes a first responder, it knows that you need a keyboard. So if I press this, a keyboard pops up. Okay, now you can see a couple of problems right there. Keyboard covers everything, so we're going to have to deal with moving stuff out of the way. The controller doesn't know anything about a text box, but if you want to use a text box in your view, you have to add text field delegate. In other words, you want to be able to delegate the events that happen in the text box to the UI view. You think of the text box as a child object of the entire view. And so you want the controller, when something happens in the text box, to be aware of it. And you do that through delegation. Okay? And delegation really just means I am now going to be able to forward up to the parent the events that happen here. And there are a whole bunch of things that the text box gives you in the way of functions and properties. Okay? So we have the class member view controller, and there's a UI view controller. That's the class of the controller for that view. And then we've added this UI text field delegate. So that's how the text box knows that it needs to have a keyboard. Okay? An awful lot of people who try to explain Swift refer to it as magical. It's not magical, it's very literal. A protocol is just a class. It's a class that has a specific way of being used. In other words, the convention is if you add a protocol to a class you define, then the methods and properties of that class, that protocol class, are then available to the class you've defined. We pointed to a problem that we had, which was when we made any text field the first responder, the keyboard moved up, and the way to remove the keyboard is to resign the status of first responder for that text field. So one simple way of doing that is to essentially trap the event of pressing the return key, and we can do that with this function. Function text field should return. And what that is, that's just, you get that function from the protocol. Remember I said the protocol is a collection of functions. That's one of them. And now because you've got that protocol in the UI view, you can put this in here and it will then know when you hit the return key on the keyboard. Hitting the return key on the keyboard is an event that the text field class traps. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring back the code, okay? I'll just highlight slide 11, okay? And I do that, and I'll make a copy of that. Command-C copies things. And then Command-F is a command to search for things. And then I can do Command-V to copy that over there. And now I've got slide 11, and I'll just go in there and put in 6 in here and return it. And it takes me right to the piece of code that's being discussed in slide 6. See that? And all I have to do is, and this is somewhat important, you want to, you can do it either way, but you click on that, you add another slant in there, and that essentially enables this, and then you add 2 slants in here. Now this code is now enabled, but there is something in here that is red because it's referring to a function that I'm going to define in slide 14. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take it out. Okay? So now I know this code works because I tested it, and so let's see what it does to the application. So let's run this again, and the build succeeds as one would hope. And now if I go in here and I type name, and I'll type in Bob. And if I hit return, it goes away. So we've just enabled when we click on this, it becomes the first responder. It brings up the keyboard, right? Because that's part of what that class does. It's part of the definition of the textField class. And there's a function in the textField class that says if you press the return button, say resign first responder. And that's how you can do that. And any of these will do the same exact thing. So I can fill them all in. Okay.
So any text field in the class that you defined is now
all these text fields are just text fields.
right. I'm saying you put 5 variables in your class, and they're all impacted by that return function equally.
Yeah, that return function applies to text fields that are in this view, because just to show you where that's going on, it's not a mystery. So let's go back. Let's go back here. This is where I essentially say this text field is delegate. It has a delegate. Remember, I created a text field delegate, and now here I'm saying this member name is now a property of the view.
Yep.
So whenever I go into it, then it becomes first responder, and whenever I hit the return key, it loses first responder. It doesn't care where it is as long as it's a text field. Oh, there's one more thing I wanted to show you. Note that when we click on here, you get what's called a standard keyboard. Okay, click return. If we click on here, same keyboard. They're all the same keyboard. Click on here, you get a keyboard. Because we haven't differentiated as to what we want when we click on the different fields. But in fact, we're going to want to see different things when we click on different, because it's really all about making a UI that's completely friendly to the end user. Okay, so that's how we handle the most elemental thing about getting rid of the keyboard. You'll see it gets immensely more complicated. So the next thing I want to talk about is how do we get different keyboards into this thing, right? How do we do that? And I'm just going to show you 3 different keyboards here. There's the standard keyboard up there, the top one, and then we have a keyboard that looks like a telephone keypad. We can do that. And then we also have a keyboard that looks like it's got an ampersand in it, They've used up some of the space for that, and a period. In the standard keyboard, if you want a period, you have to hit the number. So you're going back and forth, right? Not very convenient if you're typing an email. This one is very convenient. It's all there. And the other thing is, do we want the word return? Maybe we want the word done. Right now, the keyboard covers a lot of the fields, so we're concerned about doing something about that in a way that still makes it usable. And something else we might want to do is we might want to tell the user while he's typing stuff that he's still editing. And maybe if we think down the road a bit, let's say you type in an email and it's not valid, doesn't look like an email. So while you're typing it, maybe the text should be read. And if you leave that, you hit the done key, you leave it, it turns black if it's valid, it stays red if it's not. So it's a reminder for you to fix it because it's not a valid. There are a couple of different words that you could have in the return key that are more appropriate depending on your usage, but done is one of them, let's say, or return is another. So the way you do that is you just say text field return type, UI return type dot done. This is all nothing more than a return type is I believe that's a enum of the text field class. But from your point of view, if you go in there and just type UI return type, you can control what that key says. And you can also control the keyboard type. Keyboard type is, right now it's .default. But we have a whole range of keyboard types, and we just select from among the enumerated sets of keyboard types. So let's actually take a look at that and see where we're doing that. Okay, here's another function that you get by adding the protocol for the text field. It's a function called textField did begin editing. In other words, the text field knows when you started typing in there. It knows that you began editing. And so what we're going to do here, this is going to be a little tricky because there's a lot of code here that we're going to enable, but there's going to be a block of code here that we're not going to enable. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to enable this, and that's this function, right? And then you can see I've got a bunch of stuff here for slide 14, so I don't want to do that. But there's a lot of stuff here that I'm going to go over with you on. And we've got a little thing here that we need to close it up. This is the end of slide 7 fix. So let's go back up here and see what's going on. So when we invoke this function, the way this function is invoked is when we begin editing. When we tap that text field, we're beginning to edit. It goes right to here. And it says, what do you want me to do? And then we can do a whole bunch of things here. Okay? So what are we going to do? First of all, we want to know which text field are you in, right? Because we might want to do different things for different text fields. So what we are going to do is we're actually sending the text field object to this function. This function requires that you give it a text field object. That text field object is the text field that you began editing. You can only tap one of them at a time. So if you've made member name, then that text field object will be member name. If you did it for city, it'll be city, member city. So now this is a perfect application for the switch statement. The switch statement is just a control flow. And all it is it says switch and a parameter and then a case. And depending on what the value of this parameter is, in this case it could be member name or member city or member email, it will then do that case. Okay, this is one of the basic control flows. It's a standard control flow in all languages. Just like if then else is a standard. So you can look this up if you're not familiar with it by looking at Swift and control flow. But this is all we're doing here is we're saying we want to know which text field was selected, and if you selected member name, I'm sending a little note to myself on the bottom of the screen that will print out keyboard standards. I know which keyboard was selected. And you can see I've set the return key type as done and keyboard type as default. Okay. If I go to member city, here I chose, let's say I just picked another type of keyboard. I chose a name phone pad. Okay, that's a different kind of keyboard, and I'll show it to you. And then the third one that we have here is keyboard type is email address. Just to show you how it comes up. So if we type, you'll get a list of all the keyboard types. Okay? So as you're doing it, the Xcode environment will give you a lot of help. So these are all the keyboard types: ASCII capable, number type, decimal pad, email address, and so on. So let's run that. Let's see what that does. Okay, so now if we go to name, we get the standard keyboard. But if we go to city, remember city has a phone keypad. So if we go to click on numbers, we get a phone pad, telephone keypad. So that's a very easy way to do that. But notice something odd here. There is no done button on the phone pad. So this is just a hint of some of the complications we're going to run into. So we have to go back to text. If we go to email, we'll get an email keypad with an @ and a space and a dot. And again, but the number is just numbers here. And these things are just, we haven't done anything with them. These are just the default standard. Slide 8, we're going to make our first big move here. What we want to do here is we want to get a pick list, like the one you see here. Guest, member, presenter, organizer. So when we hit that text field, we don't want a keyboard, we want a roller to appear, okay? And the way we do that, we have to do a couple of things. But for starters, we need to add another delegate because the picker view is essentially another type of class, and it has its own delegates. In fact, it has two protocols that we need to deal with here. One protocol is a delegate protocol, and one is a PickerView source protocol. And these really are different in the sense that they do different things. But for example, a PickerView can have one set of roles or can have several roles, right? Just like a table view can have several sections and has lots of rows. So these are basically like the rows. And if you have a PickerView, let's say we wanted to have one role for member status and another row for how experienced you are with Swift. Okay, so we might want to have someone just starting out, someone who's an expert, someone who's a guru, whatever. So we might have two roles here. And we might want to, so it'll be very easy from a user interface for us to just roll the two things, and we've put in two values into place. So first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to add these two delegates. And it's just like adding the delegate for the field. Now we're adding it to the picker view. The other thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to create an instance of the picker view in the actual UI view. And the way we do that is it's just a property of the UI view. So we say let member status picker equal UI picker view. In other words, UI picker view is the class that defines the behavior of the picker view, and we create an instance of it that is a property of the UI view. This is one way to think about it, so it's all very coherent, is we didn't actually drop a an object, like a text field into the view. We just created an instance of it, and it exists because it's part of the view, and then we'll bring it up as a property of the text field. So if you look at the bottom thing here, we'll have something called, remember we had the switch view, we'll have another switch for member status, and then when it's picker, we'll just say the text field has an input property which is member status. In other words, for instead of having a keyboard, put in a picker view. And here we go. We're going to start to rock and roll here. So this slide 8 will enable the two protocols for the picker view. All we have to do here is take these two lines out. Now, you'll see something right away that might disturb you. Namely, it says there's a mistake here. That's really not a mistake. What's going on is, for some protocols, there are functions that are required and some functions that are optional. If there are required functions, then until you put them in, this will say you don't have the required functions. Okay? Okay. We can actually look at that. You can see it says type member view does not conform to protocol. So in other words, we didn't put in all the required functions. This particular protocol requires some functions. Okay, so now let's go to the next slide 8. And this one, this is, we're adding the instance, we're adding an instance of the picker view to our controller. And we do that very simply by just taking these two lines out. Now we have a picker view in the system. Let's go back to the next one. And this one is essentially saying, here is, remember how we did this with the various outlet names? We essentially delegated them to the parent. We're just doing the same thing here. So here, but here we're doing it with two things, with the delegate and the data source. So we do that again, very simply. We add a line here, and we add two lines here. And now there's one more thing here that I'm kind of sneaking in. But what I'm doing here is, now member status picker is the instance of the picker. This is the instance of the class that represents the picker. And what we want the picker to do is we want it to display a default value. So when we put it right in the view did load, what the selected row is and what the selected component is, then we're essentially saying how the picker should be set. And right now, this is not going to make a lot of sense to you because I haven't really defined the array, which is another thing I need to do in this class, in this slide. I need to define the array that I'm going to use as the elements of that picker list. So over here, I just delete these two. And now I have an array. This is just a vanilla array of of strings, guest, member, presenter, organizer. And you'll remember that they are numbered as 0, 1, 2, and 3, right? Because the numbering starts at 0. And so if I'm over here and I say the row is 1, then the default is member. Okay? So you can see there's a lot going on here. And okay, so let's go and find all the other slide 8. Okay, and the last one is, remember we did these case instances for the various keyboard types, and now we're going to have a different keyboard, and here instead of a keyboard type, we're saying it's an input view, because the keyboard is really a class that is a type UI view. It's a UI view. It's basically a square piece of your screen that's represented like a scrolling thing. So what we're going to do here is we're going to enable that. Bing and Bing. Okay, so now this is enabled. So, but we're done with the slide 8. Yes, we're done with slide 8, but it still has some things missing. And let me go back to slide 9. Slide 9 is the PickerView Protocols. And this is really where there are required functions. In order for the PickerView to exist, it must know these things. So for example, it must know number of components. How many wheels do you have? Do you have 1, 5? It needs to know that. Otherwise, it can't create it. And it needs to know how many rows there are. And the number of rows, I remember we created an array called status. So we just say the number of rows in component are status.count. The picker itself is populated in the third function, where we set the array of definitions that we've created previously to the return function, the return of that function. Once the PickerView is enabled, whenever you make a change in the PickerView, we need to have this function. And this function basically says, what did you select? So if you selected this row or that component, it knows what you selected. And once we know what you selected, let's say you selected row 3, right, which is one of the options there, then it will go, the next line it will say, assign the string in the array in the third position to the member status text field. This is where we move the data from the picker into the text field. And here we're in slide 9. So this is essentially the PickerView protocols that I showed you before. And let's get rid of the bottom side of this. And so we're essentially just going to enable all of it and disable this one. So basically what I've done is I've told the system what the PickerView should be, and let's go take a look at how it works. Okay, so now we've got 3 different types of, we've got the email, and we've got this. But now if we go to the member status, bingo, we get a scroll PickerView. And if we select presenter, it changes it over here, but there's no way to get out of it. So the natural thing to do is wrong, it turns out, but we'll do it anyway. We'll put a resign first responder right where that PickerView thing is, but that will cause a problem. But I want you to see that. So if we go here and we go out, you can see it actually captured the word presenter in the field, but we couldn't get out of it. If we try to do this, resign, you would think that would work fine. Okay, let's see what happens. Because we're just saying, okay, after you pick it, get rid of it. There are a couple of reasons why you may not want to do that. One is you may want to let the user fill all the fields before he gets out. This forces it right out. That's mistake number one about it, because you don't necessarily want to force. In other words, someone might, he still was waiting to fill in the join date. He didn't get to it, and he's already out of it. So that's not necessarily a good thing. We'll leave it in, and we'll see if we get this into trouble. Now, if we pick organizer, it goes right out. Looks pretty cool. We'll leave it in for now. We'll see what happens. Okay. Well, so, I mean, to be honest with you, that's what I did first. I thought, hey, I'll just put in a resign first responder. Makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we're done with this. We're up to number 10. And now we're going to do what's called the date picker. Date picker is a whole other animal. It looks like the picker, but it's really quite different. It's got its own set of complications. For one thing, there's lots of ways. The date is not just the date. It's also time. It's also different forms in different countries and different languages. A lot of complications here that are beautifully handled by the language. But just so you know, do we need protocols for a date picker? It turns out you don't need protocols for a date picker. Date picker has got its, but you do need to create an instance of the date picker, and then it brings all of the functions and properties that it needs into the environment. All we have to do is just, do some delegation here. So the date picker, we're going to need to initialize the date picker. In other words, we created a instance of the date picker as member joined date picker, and we'll say that we want to use today's date. NS date parentheses is a value for today's date. And by the way, the dates are stored as numbers of seconds from a year. I don't know if you knew that. So when you're talking about NS date, it actually has a number that is the exact number of seconds, let's say from 1980, large number. And then if you, and then it could display the month that is, the year that is, the hour that is, the second that is, the minute that is. But it really is only keeping track of this one giant number. And so because of that, we're going to have to deal with how we translate that number into a human readable date. So that's one of the complications with this. The input view, and now it's going to be member join date picker. So it's the same idea, but instead of sending it to the object called picker, we're going to send it to the object which is defined as a UI date picker. In other words, UI date picker is a class. And we create an instance of that class as a property of the UI view. And when we say text field input, when we are in that text field, we bring up the date picker. That's how it's done. By the way, one of the reasons why the date picker does not have any protocols that you need to add, and the picker does. The picker needs to have information from you. It needs to know how many cylinders are going to be in the picker. It needs to know how many rows are going to be in the picker. In the case of the date picker, that's all determined by the style of the date that you want to display. So if you want to display a normal date, it's 3 cylinders. And if you just want to display a day of the week, it could be just 1 cylinder, and so on. So that's the reason why the date picker and the picker are different this way. Now I'm going to go through this and do all the slide 10 changes. So I'll go to the top. And the first slide 10 change is create an instance of the date picker. That's just just very similar to what we did before. Oh, now we want to initialize the date picker. So initializing basically sets its initial values. So we're going to disable this and disable that. And now we've got, and let me just point out two things here that are relevant. There's a property of date picker called date, the instance of it, and we're just setting it to today's date. So now the date picker is set as today's date. And the other thing we need to do is pick out the date picker mode. So the instance of member join date picker has a property which is a mode, and the mode in this case is date. So just to show you what some of the options are here. So if I go here, here's date and time, just time, countdown time. There are all kinds of different things that you might want to have in your date picker. Because date picker is essentially a tool for displaying time in various forms. So that's all that is. Now, here, this is, again, we're back to the switch statement. Remember, the switch statement is where we know which text field we're in. So now we're going to go down to here, and it's member join date. So let's first enable that, then I'll talk about what happens here. Okay, so what we wanted to do is two things. One is we want to respond to a change in the date. So we're going to have to create a join date changed function, which we haven't done yet. In other words, the main member view controller will have a function called join date changed, which will take place when we pick this particular text field. And then the other thing we'll do is we'll make the input view the date picker. Okay. Okay. So and then let's go here. So this is a function called join date changed. It sends the actual UI date picker instance here. And then the first thing we're going to define here is we're going to define an instance of a class called date formatter. We'll call it formatter. Date formatter is the class that allows you to convert dates from the numbers that we talked about into something that is human readable. And now we're using the formatter, and I'll say date style, and I'm picking long. Well, let me enable this so we can see some of the options here. Okay, so if you want to see what some of the other options are, let me just, this is, there's full, there's long, there's medium, there's none. There's short, there's all kinds of options that you can have in the way you format a date. And notice it just needs a dot, doesn't need more than that. And then what we do is we take the string from the sender date property, UI picker. In other words, that's the UI picker. What's been sent here is essentially the instance of the UI picker. We take the date property of it and format it into a string, and then we set the value of that text field to that string, to that formatted string. Play around with this, and there's a lot of stuff here. okay? But what I'm hoping to give you is kind of the baseline to work from. In other words, if you need to do this kind of thing, this works, this is correct, and you should be able to make it work in your application. And okay, so I think that's it. So let's see how this thing runs. Okay, so now we're getting pretty elaborate with all these various things. You know, we've got this thing here. And now if we click this, bingo, it shows us a date. And if we want to change it, we just go like that. I want to change the year. I want to change the month. You know, so this is just a standard date picker. Now, as soon as we do this, it updates the date. We can't see it, and also we can't get out of it. Okay, so we still have problems to worry about. Let's go back here and go to done, and then we can see that, in fact, it made the changes that we wanted. The full circle we've come through so far is we've been able to enter data into the various types of text fields in a very customized way using customized keyboards and a picker and a date picker. And what we still don't have working right is the thing is blocking things. You can't always get out of it. So we have some more work to do here. Let's deal with the first thing that probably a lot of you are thinking. What do we do with the keyboard? You know, it's covering all these things. Any ideas?
Scroll the whole view up.
Scroll the view up, that's a good idea. Anything else? That's pretty good. There are a number of ways to do that, okay? What a lot of people do is there's something called a scroll view. So they put all of these objects into the scroll view, and they just move the scroll view. I've decided to do it very differently. I'm going to do a little more razzle-dazzle. And what I'm doing is the bottom 5 are in a stack. And the stack has a constraint to the bottom of the view. Okay? So I'm going to change that constraint. I'll just increase it. Then that whole stack will move up. And because the image is constrained to the top of the stack, that will move up too. But if the image moves up and you'll see someone's half face, that's not going to look great. So what I'm going to do with the image is I'm going to fade the image. Okay? So the image will fade and everything will scroll up. Okay? So how do we do that? If you notice when you first got this, there was something called slide 11. And it was already marked out. Slide 11 has got 2 outlets that we haven't spoken about yet. One of them kind of makes a lot of sense. It's just the image. In other words, so it's a link to the image. The other one is a little odd looking. It's actually a constraint. It's an outlet to a constraint. So you can actually create an outlet to a constraint. You can treat a constraint, which is just a number that you can keep an eye on. It can be a property of the UI view. Makes sense because it defines the way the UI view behaves. Change this to 11. Okay, so the first thing I want to do here is there is a property called constraint text stack bottom. Now let me show you this. Here are all the constraints. I know you probably can't see it very well, but basically, if I click on this constraint, that's the constraint between this stack and the bottom. Okay? And if I bring it up here, that's called text field stack view to bottom. That's the constraint. That's this connection. And that's a property now. And what I want to do with that is I'm going to use that to move this whole thing. Okay. So I'm capturing as a parameter, as a property of the view, the view control view, the initial value of the constraint. Remember, this is when the view gets loaded, everything is in place. So I just say, what's the initial value? And I just put it right in here. Okay? So now we're going to go to the next slide, which is, so basically what we're doing here is we're going to be using this and this as part of our animation. How do we do the animation? We actually are going to create an animation called keyboard move. And it will have one input parameter, which is a Boolean. And it's either true or false. And the name of it will be move up. Okay? And so this is just a function that I want to implement the animation. And let me show you how we do it. So now we're learning about animation. It's a long one, but let me just kill that. And then we'll kill that. Okay, so this is just a function. The function is now a method in the controller. And what we're saying is, this is something we define, and we create a variable called alpha, which is of a type CG float. CG float are the numbers that you use to identify positions, x, y coordinates on your screen. And then we have another variable called constraint. Now, if move up is true, namely you're moving up, alpha is the transparency of an image. So I'm going to set alpha to 0.1, and I'm going to set the constraints to its value initially. Remember, I defined that plus 180.
Why 180?
Because I tried different numbers and saw where it would go. That's not the sophisticated and the right way to do it. There's another way to do it where you actually retrieve the height of the keyboard.
Yeah.
And then use that number. But that we'll be doing in the future. I actually have already worked it out. But so if you want to see how it's worked out, you can download, well, if you've downloaded it, you have it. Just go and look at branch 2, and it's all done in there. Branch 2 does a bunch of things as a cleanup, including things like adds a second spinner for the thing so it can do more stuff. Anyway, so here's what it does. So it sets the constraint to 0.1 and adds the constraint position value to an additional 180. And then if it's not move up, in other words, move down, it goes back to full value and it goes back to its initial value. Now, there's an animation. There's all UI views of which the thing we're working with is a subclass of, have a method called Animate. And we're going to use the Animate method, which we can use in every view, every type of view. We can animate them separately. We're going to use that to essentially transition what we're seeing. And the way it works is, this is, I think for some people, a mystery, but it's really pretty straightforward. Basically, the animate view, there are a whole bunch of different types of ways of animating. This one gives you a duration, gives you gives you an interval. How long do you want this to be? I made it 1 second. Do you want to delay it? In other words, do you want something to pause before it animates it? Sometimes you want that effect. And then there's something called options. Options is kind of a strange thing. It's how you animate it. It kind of goes in a time curve. So curve ease out means it starts fast and eases out. Or curve ease in, it starts fast and slow. There are different ways. There's a way of flipping. You've seen the page flip up. There's a way to do, if you want to animate something from one way to another, you can do it as a page flip. There are lots of choices. Again, drill down and check it out. Now, so all this does is it says from wherever you are now, this is where I want you to go. And it knows the alpha should, if this is a animation true, it says go to alpha 0.1 and go to constraint this. And if we implement that, it will then do it. Now, we still have to call this method somewhere. So the question is, where do we call this method? I'm going to do one other thing here. Storyboard. Okay, now this image is not going to look very nice as a fade, so I'm just going to go here and pick another image. I'm going to pick a nice college girl. We'll fade her out. Okay, and so that's how we animate the keyboard. We'll go to number 13, and the question is, where do we want to initiate the keyboard move? In other words, we've got a function called keyboard move. So one logical way you would think would be when the text field does begin editing, you put in a keyboard move as true, and it should move it up. And then the text field did end editing, keyboard move false, and that should wrap it up. Let's try that. So this is text field did begin editing. Okay, so we're going to enable this thing right here. So keyboard move up. So now when we begin editing, the thing will slide up. And let's go here. Function field did end editing. So keyboard will slide up. So we'll take this out here. And sometimes this gets tricky because they're overlapping things here. In other words, this is a chunk for slide 18, which we will never talk about. But okay, so we've got, and we want to put this in. Okay, so I think this is it. Let's see how this flies. Okay, build succeeded. Okay, so now if we select something here, it slides it up. And if you hit done, it slides it down.
Right on.
But there's a problem. There's several problems, obviously. So let's see what a solution might be. So the problem is we initiate the move with this and we restore the screen with this, and it's a fade in, fade out problem. You click remember this, it slides up. You click this, slides down. Click this, slides up. You click this, nothing happens. And here's something else. If I go over here, watch what happens. Oh, slides in and out. You see that? Whoops.
Yeah.
Uh-oh, we don't want that. So we need to fix these things. And this is where you really are rolling up your sleeve and getting at the code. Let's take a look at what we can do here and why there's a problem here. Well, first of all, every time it starts editing, so obviously every time we go to a new thing, it will just go and go up and down. right? Because it's ending this one, beginning this one. So we don't want to do it that way. Okay. So we'll try to fix it. Okay. So one of the things we can do to fix it is to say only move it up if the constraint is at its initial value. In other words, so we can do an if test. If the constraint is the initial value, because no point in moving it up if it's already up there, because that will, so we can clean that up. And the other thing we can do is, so let's just clean up number 14. Okay, so this one, so we're going to just add this thing here. And all this does, well, I'm doing two things at once. On the one hand, I'm setting the if condition so that it only applies the keyboard move if the position of the stack bottom is the same as the initial. I'm also turning the color of the text to red once it's enabled. We have a few more things to clean up. First of all, we've added the keyboard move, a call to the keyboard move function, but we need to take out the one that was there before without the if condition, so we'll take that out. The next thing we want to do is we want to go up to the text field should return call, and we want to enable a keyboard move function there, because when we hit the return key now, we want the keyboard to move out of the way. And finally, we also want to go to the text field did end editing, and over there we want to suppress the keyboard move call, because we don't want that to occur when we leave every field, because that will just keep the thing coming in and out. So I think that should do it. Let's see how it works. So first thing, let's add a name. And if we click on that, you can see it slides away nicely. As we enter stuff, it turns it red. And if we go to another one, we add something in here. So there's we've managed to get control of the entries, and if we hit the enter key, it comes back down. However, we still have it showing up in red, so we'll need to deal with that. Let's take a look at this. Now if we click on this, remember we automated the removal of the keyboard, resigning from the text field when we made a selection. So obviously we're going to have to clean that up. And we go over here, we put something in here. So everything turns red now, which we need to fix. And also we need to fix the this. And also we don't really have a way of getting out of these two. Or we won't have one once we get rid of the resign first responder from the picker view. So we're going to need to do additional cleanup here. And let's see what is involved with that, what the problems are at this point. We have letters that are in red, so we're going to need to turn them back to black if they're valid entries. We also have a way of exiting the picker, but there's some problems with that, because we probably want to go from field to field without being forced to exit. And we don't have a way of exiting out of the datetime picker. So one way of doing a very simple way of exiting all of them is by employing a tap gesture and simply saying that if we tap anywhere except on one of these fields, we should resign the first responder, and that will automatically take care of taking away the keyboard, and then we also probably would want to do something with the, with the display coming back. Tap gesture is something that can be used to resign first responder status whenever we select anything other than a text field. And we can accomplish this by adding a gesture recognizer, which is just this very simple command, which is a function of the view. In other words, add gesture recognizer can identify a target action, and the target action we want to select is also a function of the UI view, and it's called end editing. End editing will cause one of its embedded text fields to resign first responder status. In our UI, we have 5 text fields, and 3 of them use the keyboard, which has a return key. So it's convenient to call the resign first responder function, which will remove the keyboard when the user presses the return key or done key. But if the input into the text field is coming from either the picker or the date picker, we have no return key, so we have a problem. Moreover, we want to handle the resign first responder step in a consistent way for all of the text fields. A simple solution is to use a tap anywhere on the view other than one of the text fields, pickers, or keyboards to initiate a resign first responder request. And this is easily done by adding something called a gesture recognizer in the viewDidLoad function. So recognizing a gesture is a function that is part of all views, and it can be used to invoke another UI view function called end editing. So let me show you how to do this. If we go to the slide 15 piece of code that we have commented out and uncommented, we see a add gesture recognizer function that is really a function that's part of the UI view. And that then can invoke another function called end editing. And end editing is a method that looks at the current view and also its subview hierarchy for the text field that is currently the first responder. If it finds one, it asks that the text field resign as first responder. And so a tap with this thing enabled will very quickly move the keyboard away because it's the first responder status has been deleted. So let's see how this works in practice. We'll start by just filling in a bunch of stuff in here for all of the various fields. And we'll select a member, and we'll also change the date. Now, if we tap anywhere, for example over here, then the keyboard, or in this case, date picker, goes away. And if we click anywhere again, it comes back. But if we click, because the keyboard now has a done key, we can hit the done key, and then it removes the keyboard and also moves everything down. Notice, however, that if we tap elsewhere, although the date picker in this case is removed, the various text fields and the image do not come back down. So we have some more work to do here. And the way we'll address this problem is by using something called notifications. What else do we need to think about? Well, there's something called notifications. And rather than rely on the resign first responder, we can rely on a notification that will tell us when the keyboard is being dismissed. So we can subscribe to this notification, And we can respond by restoring the position of the text field and image. So we can do this way. We can subscribe to the notification center, and we want to observe when the keyboard will be hidden. So whenever the keyboard hides, we'll be notified about it. And when we're notified about it, we can then execute a keyboard will hide function, which will then call the keyboard move function that we wrote earlier. So this gives us a very clear path to controlling when the keyboard will hide. Notifications is the way that iOS informs you about events that are going on. You create a notification center, and you can then add an observer, which usually is a particular UI view, which is interested in knowing about particular events. So this is analogous to having your UI view listen to a radio channel, which will tell your UI view about particular events that you're interested in. For example, when the keyboard is going to be hidden. And the code that we need here to do that. We have commented out this particular code, and we'll uncomment it. Let me discuss exactly what we do here to enable notification. First thing we want to do is we want to add a notification center, and we do that inside the view.did.load. And the notification center is essentially now a property of the UI view. And so now we can then look at the notification center's ability to add an observer, and we do that right here. And we add an observer, and that observer then does a couple of different things. For one, it selects the kind of thing you want to observe. So we want to observe when the keyboard will hide. And that's just an option here. So what do you want to do when you observe this? So if the keyboard is hidden and you're notified about it, you're telling the system that you want to go ahead and execute this function. Now the reason why we have a red dot here is because we don't have that function defined. So let's go and find that function and define it. So here's the function that we need, and we'll enable it the way we usually do. And this is just a keyboard will hide function, and all it does is execute the keyboard move, with the move up setting set to false. In other words, move everything back down and restore things to their original condition. So let's see how this will work. So now we have, remember we had, we'll just put in something in here. And we'll put something into the date joined, we'll put August. And now we'll tap out here. And now you'll see that when we tap anywhere, so we can go anywhere. And now if we tap here, it'll restore it. So now we're using notifications to bring things back into order. So what else do we need to do here? Well, we still have a couple of problems, a little bit of cleanup. We still haven't dealt with the image, and we also have all these things in red. And we also, right now, we will allow the user to type in anything in the email area, and it'll be okay. Well, so we need to essentially polish this up, and that's what we're going to do next. Let's revisit the function textField did begin editing. This is the starting point when we first select one of the text fields. And we use a switch statement to select which one we're in, and we can essentially access a variety of keyboards, and we can also select to use as a keyboard a picker and a datetime picker. And that's part of the power of this of this function. But we're also going to use this function to initiate the movement of the text fields as well as the image up and out of the way of the keyboard, because when we start editing, the keyboard slides up from the bottom, so we want to slide everything else out of the way. And we do that, we initiate the movement away from the keyboard with this statement. In other words, we check to see if the constraint is at its original position, and if it is, we move everything out of the way with the keyboard move command. And the other thing we want to do in this function is we want to enable a visual representation of the fact that we're making an edit. So we change the color of the text to red to show the user that they're in the middle of editing something, and once they're done, we'll change it back to black. And when they're done, we're going to be in the text field did end editing, and this is a place where we can do our cleanup, if you will. So one of the things we'll do here is we'll change the color back to black. In other words, we'll only want to do that if everything goes well. And this is also an area where we can do some validation. So for example, a place where you might want to do validation is when you enter an email. Email has a lot of very specific requirements. An email name has very distinct characteristics. It needs an ampersand, it needs a URL, and so we can do validation in a separate function, and we can check to see if what we've entered is valid, and if it is, we'll change the text to black, and if it's not, we'll just dump the user out of the switch statement, which means it will not be, it'll remain red. And finally, we want to be able to add an image from an album that we have on our mobile. And in order to do that, there's a number of things we need to do. For one, we might want to add protocols to enable the use of an image selector. And the image selector, the way we select images is we have a UI image picker control, and so we need to add a delegate for that control. And because when we're using an image picker control, we're actually displaying a separate other view, so we'll also need to add a UI navigation controller. And of course, in order to enable the adding of an image, we're going to need to have an add image button and the corresponding function that executes what the addition of an image does. So in the add image button, we're going to create an instance of a UI image picker control, and then we'll use that to access a photo library and so on. And finally, we're going to want to add some functions that are used to essentially respond to our selection process. So if we decide we don't want to pick an image, we can cancel out. And if we do pick an image, we want to then take that image and store it in the image view. So let's take a look at the texted begin editing function. The main thing that happens here is we are sending to this function the actual text field when we tap it. And then the switch statement decides which text field was tapped. And then it specifies the keyboard. It specifies the word done on the return key. And in the case of the text field that was designed for member status, instead of putting up a keyboard, it puts up a input view, which is a picker list. And similarly, for the date join, it puts up a picker view, a date time picker view. So that's what this does. And we, in addition to that, added this little constraint here, so that when the keyboard is at its initial position, then it can go ahead and be moved up with the function keyboard move up. And finally, the last thing we do here is when the text field begins editing, it changes the color of the text field that is being edited to red. Okay, that of course implies that at some point we'll need to change it to black, and that happens right here. The text field did end editing. One of the things we'll do here is we'll change the text field to black. So let's enable this piece of code. And you can see we have text field text color becomes black. Now, you'll notice that there's a little red dot here, and that's because we're calling up a function that we haven't really enabled yet. And what I want to point out is that this is also an opportunity to specifically validate each of the different fields. So in the example we have here on the member email field, we know that email has got some very specific requirements. It needs to have an ampersand. It needs to have a URL. The URL typically has a period in it. So we can check for all of these things. And we can do it with a function, which I have here. And let me just show you what that function is. That function is right here. Let me enable that function. And that function is a function which essentially takes the string that is given to it and returns a Boolean. In other words, it says this string is either valid or not valid. And the way it does it is by using something called NS predicate, and by matching the string that's sent to it against a set of requirements, which is spelled out here. Without going into this in any detail here, I will just suggest that you can do a lookup on NS predicate and on the use of this kind of evaluation. But in any case, we'll see how this works and how it gives us the response we want. So that should take care of the changing of the color and the validation of the email. There's one more thing that we want to take care of at this point, and that is, of course, that we want to be able to select images or take images with the mobile camera that we then attach to the display. So before we can do that, what we need to do is add two protocols. Image picker control is right here, and we'll enable that. And what that does is it essentially gives us the ability to delegate properties of an image picker to the UI view controller that we have here. And the other thing we need to also add is something called the UI navigation controller delegate. And what that does is that gives us functionality that allows us to navigate between this UI, this view, and the view that is brought up when we select an image, because we're going to get an image of all the images that we can select from. So the first thing we need to do is add these two protocols. And then the next thing we'll want to do is we'll want to come here and actually add, we'll want to add a button onto the screen And I'm not going to go into the process of adding a button. I'm sure most of you know how to add a button. And you want to put the button right underneath the image, in this case. And we then want to enable this function that is essentially activated when we tap the button. So let's enable this code and see what's here. When you tap the button, and let me just show you what that looks like. Let's go to the storyboard. And here's the add image button, which we've already put in here. And you can see that in fact it's right in the image stack. So there's the image stack is right here, and the member image is right there, and then the add image button is right there. So it's part of the image stack, and basically when we press this button, we're going to get this is the button, and this is the action we get. And what happens here? Well, first we need to create an instance of the UI picker controller, and we just call it photo picker. And the photo picker itself has to delegate to this UI view. And then one of the first things we have to say is where's the source of the images that this picker is picking from. We've chosen the photo library, which is basically the album of images that you have on your mobile. And then finally we tell the picker present the photo picker, which means it will actually display the images in your library, in your photo library. It'll animate the display, so we say that's true. And when it does that, you're now in a different UI view. You're in a UI view that this controller has brought to life. And we have two other functions here, as I said, that are very important. One is the image picker control did cancel. This is a function that responds to a cancel button when you're looking at the images that you want to select. The second function that's important is the image picker controller. And that's a function that responds to a selection by you of the image that you want. The array of images that are available is in the info array. And then when you select an image, and then you can then put that image that you just selected right into the image property of the member image UI view. And then you dismiss the view. Okay? So let's see how all of this fits together. And let's go ahead and do a little bit of testing. But before we do, it's generally a good practice to take a quick look over at this little triangle here and click on that. And if you have any issues before you run it, it'll show up over here. So we've got a compiler error coming up, and if we click on it, we'll find it. And there it is. So the problem we have here is that we didn't enable this line of code, which means that the default option doesn't have any thing to do, and you need to have something to do in the default. And if we do that, we'll fix it, and now the shifting it back to black is enabled. So now we don't have any problems. There's one more thing we need to take care of, and that's having to do with the PickerView. So let's find the PickerView. There's the PickerView Protocols, and let's scroll down to here. You remember that when we select the PickerView using this function, we added a resign first responder, and that causes the PickerView to essentially go away from the screen, but we don't want that anymore because we're now using notifications to do that. So that should be the last thing that we need to do before we do our test. So let's go ahead and try that. Let's run this. And I'm going to put my name in first here. Neil. And I'm going to put my city in here. Los Angeles. And notice that as I leave the field, it goes back to black, letting me know I'm done editing with it. But in the case of the email, I'm going to put in something completely invalid. So this is not a valid email. So if I go to the next field, it stays red. And I'll put in a presenter as my category. Let me go back and fix that. So I need an ampersand, and I need some more characters than the name. If I go away from that now, it's still red because it's still not correct. So if I go in here and put in a dot and a couple of more characters, then it does buy it. So if I go to date, I'll just put in a date, and that's basically it. So if I click on here, I've filled in all the fields. They all seem to work correctly. So everything looks fine. So let's go and change the image. We click on that. We get our photos. We'll pick this one and select that. And there we are. That seems to be working just fine. And that pretty much wraps up what we wanted to show you. This is, I will remind you, the first part of a three-part series of lectures. And this is the one where we explain how to capture the data for a member. And then the next stage, we're going to discuss how we move this data into a table view and how we go back and forth and how we segue forward and unwind the segue and do all of the related things that you might do in a table view. I wanted to thank LearnSwift LA for hosting this presentation. And I also want to thank Stephen Berard of Event Farm for providing the venue where we present various presentations on Swift topics throughout the year. Thanks, guys.